News Central now at this hour begins in West Africa, where Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu has approved the appointment of a managing director and 2 executive directors to serve on the management team of the National Education Loan Fund. They include Akintunde Sawyerr as managing director, Frederick Akinfala as executive director, finance and administration, and Mustapha Iyal as executive director, operations. Presidential Special Advisor on Media and Publicity Ajuri Nganani, in a statement on Friday, said the appointments are in line with his determination to secure Nigeria's socio-economic future by ensuring sustainable higher education and critical skill development for all Nigerian students and the youth. Let's also tell you that the Nigerian government, in collaboration with the National Identity Management Commission, NIMC, is set to introduce an upgrade. That's an upgraded national identity card integrated with payment capabilities and social service features. Now, developed with the Central Bank of Nigeria and the Nigeria Interbank Settlement System, the card will run on the Afrigo domestic card scheme. According to Adegboye, the NIMC's head of corporate communications, this initiative aligns with the NIMC's Act number 23 of 2007, aiming to provide a multi-purpose card for Nigerians and legal residents. The enhanced card feature will facilitate identity verification and access to government and private services, and also promote financial inclusion and citizen empowerment while encouraging participation in national development efforts. Still in Nigeria, and this time around on security matters, the chairman and members of the Board of Inquiry set up by the Defense Headquarters to probe the Okwama killings have arrived Delta State. The state governor, Sheriff Oborevwori, received them on a courtesy visit at Government House Annex in Warri. Now, the chairman of the Board of Inquiry, Air Vice Marshal David Ajayi, said the board is in the state to investigate the unfortunate incident that happened at the Okwama community, where 17 soldiers were ambushed and killed. He called on the governor to assist the board in its inquiry to ensure the relevant stakeholders were invited to give account of what led to the crisis. Meanwhile, the governor of the state said his administration was sorely pained about recent crises leading to the killings in the community. The governor, who narrated how the state managed the situation, said the state government will do all it can to assist the board on its assignment.
And so, we're here to gather facts from security agencies, from community dwellers, community leaders, because if we are to come up with reports that will help the Defense Headquarters take decision to forestall future occurrence and also to enhance the relationship between the military security agencies and the immediate community that they are sworn an oath to protect, there must be communication. There must be healthy communication. So it is to that effect, sir, that we are here to gather the fact so that we can make recommendation to DHQ that will enhance civil-military relationship and will forestall future occurrence of this, sir.
Most people, they don't have knowledge of what is happening, and they speak out of not having the knowledge. Setting up this board of inquiry is a very good one. We're also planning to set up a board of inquiry. We're also waiting the action of the military. We don't want to rush into it. We feel that the procedure needs to be followed. The people have to be buried and find succor for them before we start doing that. That does not stop the investigation. In the other state here, we don't encourage crisis. But you know, in a big as this state, with so many ethnic nationalities, there are bound to be issues. But the way you're able to manage it, we are managing a lot of them. But we're unfortunate that this one has happened in this way. We still have the opposition we are managing. People will not understand. We want to assure you that whichever information you want, we'll give to you. We also come with our position paper to submit to you people before you will leave.
of the Council of Urhobo Traditional Rulers have appealed to the federal government to allow innocent indigenes of Kwama to return to their ancestral home. Chairman of the council, Honorable Dr. Emmanuel Sideso Abe1, the Ovie of Ovigwe Kingdom, made the call shortly after the Save Our Souls SOS visited the council in Efunu Delta State. The council, however, stated that it was deeply touched by the pain suffered by innocent indigenes of Okwama and the neighboring communities and commiserated with those who lost their loved ones. On the Ovie of Ewu Kingdom, declared wanted by the Nigerian army and the subsequent surrendering of the traditional ruler to the Commissioner of Police Delta State, demanded unconditional release of the monarch while the independent panel of inquiry unraveled the facts behind the issues.
The Urhobo Council of Traditional Rulers restated their call for the setting up of an independent investigative inquiry into the immediate and remote causes of the Okwama military incident, as this is the only way the truth can be revealed and avoid future incidents. 2, that the good people of Ewu Kingdom should remain calm and law-abiding, as the council will ensure that no innocent person suffers unjustly. 3, the council once more commiserate with the families of the slain soldiers and the Nigerian Army Authority.
Let's go on a quick break. When we return, we have more stories. Stay with us. Welcome back. Of course, at this point, we would also announce that in the course of the news, we'll be having God Bless Otubore, President Ready to Lead Africa. We'll be speaking on Senegal elections, lessons for Nigeria and the rest of Africa. Now let's move to the rest of the news, where Nigeria's federal government says that the recent increase in an electricity tariff for Band A customers enjoying 20 to 24 hours of electricity will relieve government of about 50% of funds used to subsidize the electricity sector. Nigeria's Minister of Power, during a ministerial scorecard series in Abuja, says that the increase has become apt as it will enable government focus on investing in other key sectors of the economy and providing liquidity and investment in infrastructure. Now, News Central's Amadine Uyi tells us more.
The ministerial scorecard series was the fourth since its inception. In attendance were senior officials from the Ministry of Information and National Orientation and the Ministry of Power. The Minister of Information and National Orientation says that the series is aimed at informing citizens of government's efforts and performances in key sectors.
It is designed to bring information to the doorstep of Nigerians, because information is one of the strong pillars of democracy.
The Minister of Power, while giving an update on activities in the Power Ministry, also took time to explain why the recent tariff increase had become necessary.
As of today, before the introduction of the tariff increase, government is subsidizing nothing less than 67% of the cost of producing, transmitting, and distributing electricity in Nigeria. At the current exchange rates, this is going to translate into 2.9 trillion naira for 2024. This is more than 10% of the national budget.
In January, the generation invoice was 240 billion to the discos. Discos were only mandated to pay 24 billion. That is 10%. So that tells you that 90% of the generation cost, in this case, I didn't mention transmission and distribution so that you don't think that the figures are different. 90% of the generation cost was being borne by the government.
He says that the power sector must relieve government of the burden of subsidies so that it can focus on other important sectors.
Power sector is just a single sector out of so many sectors that government has to attend to. We have the works, we have housing, we have education, we have health, we have defense, and so on and so forth, that are all competing for this meager revenue from the government. So it will be very, very insensitive on our part to force or compel governments to continue to subsidize at that rate of almost 3 trillion for the power sector alone.
The minister also added that the recent tariff increase for Band A electricity customers in the country will make funds available for investment in critical infrastructure by generating companies and core investors. In Abuja for News Central, I am Amadine Uyi.
To discuss this, we are joined by public affairs commentator Gbenga Anjonuga. Gbenga, thank you for joining the news. Now, let's start with...
Thank you for having me.
Great to connect again. Now, how might the recent adjustment in electricity tariffs for Band A consumers in Nigeria affect government subsidies designated for the sector? And what analysis can you offer regarding this altercation?
For me, I want to agree with the government that we need to cancel subsidy, but I also, in the same breath, want to disagree with government. I want to agree with government because I know that once they cancel this subsidy, if they do not bring it back through the back door like they did fuel subsidy, then there will be no reason for those who are siphoning money and stealing our commonwealth through this subsidy to be able to steal those money. But I want to disagree with them because if you look at the figure that they have been posting between 2016 and 2024, you would ask yourself, if they told us that in 2016 or 2017, that the amount they were paying for electricity subsidy is less than 500 billion. And between 2017 and 2024, they are already telling us that we are now paying almost 3 trillion naira for electricity subsidy. Then they should give us the figure of the number of buildings, businesses that needed electricity between those year period. Because what I feel as a citizen, looking at the disparity between the figure in 2016 and in 2024, is that some people knowing fully well that Ogata Ogaota, which means whether they sell or they did not sell, the money will come in through subsidy. They keep increasing the figure, despite the fact that the houses that have been metered, the houses that are getting electricity have not commensurately increased. So that is why I agree with them. But rather than pushing the burden on the masses, to ask the masses to pay and remove this subsidy, the reason why I'm disagreeing with them is that why can't they do in-house cleaning? Because I can tell you for free, if they are sure of themselves, let them come to use our traditional gods and orishas to swear. I can assure you for free that the amount they are paying for subsidy is not up to the amount that they are quoting, that they are lying. You understand? But because we don't have, so people are just putting the figure because they know government will pay. And that is why I disagree with them that why pushing the government when you can clean your house to know actually between 2017 and 2024. How many new houses, how many new industries are you supplying electricity to?
I mean, Gbenga, you said quite a number of things. Gbenga, you said quite a number of things. I mean, I've known you for quite a while, so I know that you're a true African man. But let's talk about the two issues that the minister did raise during yesterday's address. He said that, number one, the sector is facing a liquidity problem, and also he talked about infrastructural deficit. And in all of that, he also talked about one issue which, of course, connects both of them is consumer pricing, that there is a price gap. And that brings me to the issue of metering, which you mentioned. Not everybody, not many of these consumers are properly metered. Hence, it affects their revenue. right? So you talked about in-house cleaning. I know that for the prepaid meter, for instance, is what you use, you pay for. So how do you think these issues can be addressed in the area of pricing and also infrastructural deficit that the minister mentioned yesterday?
I agree with the Federal Minister of Power that there is a lacuna between the facility infrastructure that the both transmission, generation, and distribution company needs to make. And that is why I applaud the former president on the bill for state to generate their electricity, transmit, and distribute that has been passed into law. I think that solves one part of the problem. So for some of us, we now need to start asking our governors in our various states that you need to find a way to allow states, local governments who can generate the electricity to come into the fray. Because the same thing that is happening to electricity sector was what happened to the telecommunication sector before that sector was deregulated, and we had the like of all these both multinational and the indigenous players who are now making the sector competitive. But my own solution is this, that in the interim, before the governors are able to do their own electricity and all the whatnot, like we have in Aba now with that electricity
gas plant,
IPP system. Yes, that was in Aba. Now, before our various state governors can catch up with that, in the meantime, what I would have wanted is that let the distribution company meter all unmetered houses. Every unmetered houses. If you cannot meet up with metering all unmetered houses, then you have no moral right to increase tariff. Because at the end of the day, if you call your tariff 1,000, after all, some mobile communication company, their prices are not the same from company to company. And we will decide how much we want to use per minute or per second. And because we have this ability to monitor how much call we make, the power is with the consumer. But in the case of the electricity generation company, because more than 50% of all powered houses, companies, and systems are unmetered at the moment, then you are still giving the power to these distribution companies who can continue to pilfer and treat consumers as they like. If you give me a prepaid meter, I can, if you like, call your whatever 500 naira per kilowatt hour. I will decide I want to use power for 4 hours per day. Even if you give me 20 hours per day, I can decide out of that 20 hours per day, I only need 4 hours for my crucial need, and then I will use it and I will switch off my prepaid meter. And that way, you have no problem, I have no problem. But in the case where my house is not metered with...
Gbenga, I think we lost you there. We lost our communication with you there. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm with you.
Okay, we lost you for a moment. But before I let you go, quickly, the minister said that the monies that they were trying to save in the sector would be diverted to other key sectors that equally need funding. Now, the question of accountability, most times when we hear, subsidies taken away, the follow-up question is, how do we ensure that the monies that, used to be paid for these services are used judiciously and not embezzled? So how do you suggest accountability can be, upheld in all of this process? 30 seconds.
For me, I've lived in this country long enough to know that government can tell stories. And I've lived long in this country to know that 60 to 70% of the story that government tells are not true or half truth, as the case may be. They will tell us they want to divert the money made from this removal of subsidy to take care of other things. The money that they have saved from the removal of subsidy in petroleum sector, that they are now paying our state, for example, my state, Ogun State, that used to collect around 2-3 billion a month, that is now collecting almost 10 billion a month. Am I seeing it as a citizen in my state? You see, government have good intention on paper, but in reality, have we been seeing it? So if want us
Benga, I'm sorry, we are having difficulty actually connecting with you. We are losing you, your network. But thank you for joining in. Great to see you again. Now, let's, of course, discuss other issues. We are, of course, at this point, I'm also joined by a member of the Urobo Reasoning Society, Professor Sani Ahifeda. Thank you for your time. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for your time. Now, Professor, let's start off with this. As an Urobo indigene, how do you feel when you hear reports that residents of Okwama have been forced to live in forest following the killing that took place in the community?
For that question, my feeling was just like the feeling of any other Urobo citizen. It was a dual kind of responding that 17 soldiers of the Nigerian army were gruesomely murdered in that manner. Then we're further saddened that the Nigerian military focused on the tiny island of Okwama, a community of less than 500 people, labeling that community as a den of criminals that must be wiped out. Some of us saw it as a tragedy. We also saw it as a continuation of the long history of oppression and repression of the Nigerian state against our people. Some of us had thought that at this point in the development of Nigeria, a thing of this nature happening, there should have been an independent commission of inquiry set up within 2 days of this happening so that we can actually get to the bottom of what happened. Rather, what we saw was the Nigerian military, probably the largest in Africa, unleashing its arsenal on a helpless community, accusing them of that dastardly act. Those who know Okwama will know that that community does not have the capacity to engage even Boy Scouts, how much more officers and men, well-trained officers and men of the Nigerian army. And it is unfortunate that the dominant narrative so far, as represented by what the military is saying, has not been coherent. Knee-jerk response, the military accused Okwama youths of being the masterminds of this gruesome murder of the military officers.
I mean,
within 48 hours or so.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt your line of thought, but let's go back to the manner at which these officers were killed. I mean, they were not just killed, their bodies were mutilated. I mean, some reports have it that their stomachs were opened. I mean, reports actually have it that their stomachs were opened and their heads, severed from their body and thrown into the river, while some were scattered across the community, body parts all over the place. And I mean, many are calling on the federal government to actually caution the military in its, approach at fishing out the perpetrators of this heinous crime. Now, do you share same view? And do you also think that, I mean, a crime like this, even if they claim that it did not happen, by members of the community, I mean, for something of this magnitude to have happened, don't you also think that there should be information somewhere pointing to the perpetrators?
You see, ideally, what should be done is to set up an independent commission of inquiry. Killing those officers is a
I think we lost connection with our guest there, but thank you so much for joining the news. At this point, we'll go on a quick break. When we return, we have more stories. Stay with us. The legislative arm of government has been tasked to strive towards achieving full autonomy and absolute separation of powers from the executive arm of government. This was during the launch of the book, The Legislature and the Challenge of Good Governance in the Country. Now, the stakeholders urged members of parliament to do all they can to contribute to the growth of the nation's democracy, improve good governance, and meet the yearnings of citizens. Now, Amadin Uyi tells us more.
The session had in attendance both serving and former lawmakers, members of the Catholic Caritas Association of Nigeria, including key stakeholders in the nation's political space. They say Nigeria's legislative arm of government is fundamental to the growth of the nation's democracy.
The legislature is a representation of democracy. And democracy, demo and kratos, simply means the people's power. So it is the power of the people. And the legislature represents what was the original, structure of governance.
Those in attendance said the book being launched focused on the nation's legislative arm of government and proffered recommendations on how to improve their performance, legislative functions, and activities of lawmakers.
The book is timely for me, and then it's coming at a point where in our history as a nation, where the legislature needs to be up and doing, because of the fact that the legislature in our time is a bit complicit with the executive in perpetrating issues of corruption against the people of this country.
The content of the book is so rich that every legislator that happens to grab his or her hands on the book will improve in the legislative affairs of the National Assembly, even to the State Assembly.
They also used the opportunity to urge federal lawmakers to strive for full autonomy and separation of powers so that they can improve their functions.
The arms of government is to know that there's a separation between them and the executive branch. There are three branches: the executive, the legislative branch. So they should understand their own role. They should not be rubber stamped to the executive. They should be totally independent and play their own role. And if they play their own role and communicate with the constituency which they represent, things will be much better.
If there's clear separation, then the legislature eventually conduct their roles, their functions adequately and perfectly without any interference. It's on that note that the good people of Nigeria can have good governance, and which can lead to the development that we're yearning for. But insofar as the legislature becomes an appendage of the executive, we cannot have this.
They added that the legislature must live up to the expectations of citizens and ensure Nigerians reap the dividends of democracy. In Abuja for News Central, I am Amadin Uyi.
The news continues in West Africa, where Senegal's Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko says a new government has been appointed with 25 ministers and 5 junior ministers. The cabinet was approved by the President, Bassirou Faye, who was inaugurated on Tuesday and appointed Sonko a key backer as Prime Minister. The cabinet will be closely watched after Faye made radical campaign promises, such as dropping the CFA franc West African common currency. Key appointments include Sheikh Diba as Finance Minister, as Diba was previously the Finance Ministry's Director of Budget Programming. Abdurrahman Sarr was named Economy Minister. The Oil and Energy Ministry will be led by Barame Diop, who was Vice President of Sonko and Faye's now dissolved PESTAF party. 2 generals were named Interior and Defense Ministers. The accolades have been pouring in for Senegal after a successful completion of its general elections. Are there lessons that Nigeria and other African nations can learn from this and perhaps strengthen their electoral processes? Well, let's find out. Now, joining me on the news via Zoom is the President ready to lead Africa. God bless Otubere. God bless. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Now, great. Now, let's talk about specific aspects of the Senegalese general elections and the processes that contributed to its success. How can these be implemented and adapted by Nigeria and other African nations to strengthen their own electoral processes?
Well, I mean, the things and the variables that have led to what we now have in Senegal, it's not a one bullet or a one-dimensional approach variable. It's a combination of a lot of things, which is the quality of education of the Senegalese people, of course, the history of democratic consolidation, an independent constitutional council, which also oversees election-related matters, as well as the determination of the Senegalese population to not have a government that is run by an illegitimate many, or rather an illegitimate few. So what has happened is a combination of different variables that ultimately has a lot to do with people power and people commitment. So what is a combination of different variables that we are now celebrating today.
Now, in what ways will you say Senegal managed to ensure transparency, inclusivity, and also credibility in its recent polls? And how can these practices be replicated, across many African countries, particularly what we are beginning to see in some parts of Africa where there is a power grab and military takeover?
So one thing I think most people should know is that the military in Senegal, they boast one of the most well-educated military groups in the West African sub-region, as well as, even in Africa. For them, the military is designed to protect the republic and not protect the regime. It's not regime protection. It's about the republic. So what you find is it's not something that Senegalese military, sort of pride themselves in or see themselves as responsible for. So that is why you have that level of professionalism, and that also filters back to how citizens engage. If you want to understand how they were able to, ensure transparency and all of this, all the things that you've asked, is you look at the independence of the courts, the independence of the courts, the idea that one man cannot upend the development of democracy. Also, what you have is a virile and active civil society ecosystem in Senegal. Senegal has the most organized civil society space in Africa right now. So at the end of the day, like I said, the things that led to transparency, inclusivity, that have brought about what we all are celebrating. Now we have a 44-year-old who is running the country, and you see the people that are appointing, they're young people. And Senegal has literally just gone through a rebirth. It's a big challenge for us as young people and young leaders who are emerging. We're praying for Faye and his Senegal compatriots to succeed, because now they hold the key to why we are making the argument we're making that we're ready to lead Africa and that young people should be given the mantle of leadership.
God bless. Thank you so much for your time on the news. All right, now let's move to East Africa. France will aim to reset ties with Africa by building balanced partnerships that are beneficial to the continent. This is according to the country's top diplomat, Stephen Sawyerr, who on a visit to Nairobi as part of an African tour. The official's trip comes as relations have spiraled downwards between France and some former African colonies, as the continent becomes a renewed diplomatic battleground with Russia and Chinese influence growing.
Will update us on the... Votre question, d'abord, vous dire qu'effectivement, en Afrique, il n'y a pas que le Sahel. Et il y a des belles coopérations Et nous avons fait avec les pays africains une grande priorité de la diplomatie française parce que le continent africain est en passe aussi de devenir une puissance culturelle, économique, diplomatique. On le voit avec les enjeux notamment sur des grandes crises internationales sur lesquelles le Kenya joue un rôle très important. Et je pense que notamment la France aura comme vocation à renouveler, à construire des partenariats équilibrés, respectueux mutuellement et au bénéfice d'ailleurs, au bénéfice de l'ensemble des pays avec les pays africains. C'est tout l'enjeu de notre feuille de route, diversifier ces partenariats, les rendre bénéfiques également pour les pays sur lesquels nous allons investir, c'est le cas.
We have also agreed to work collectively to advocate for more reform and inclusive global climate financing framework. We underlined the necessity to urgently scale up global climate finance and noted the need for an increased level of climate finance, including contributions from the private sector and other innovative sectors.
Staying in East Africa, April 7th, 2024 marks the start of the Kwibuka 30, the 30th commemoration of the genocide against the Tutsi, which began on April 7th, 1994. Now, meanwhile, despite Rwanda's efforts to push for reconciliation between survivors and those who perpetrated the genocide, the journey to healing has been a bumpy road. The Kigali Genocide Memorial will be a focal point as the flame of remembrance, while dignitaries are expected to place wreaths at the mass graves. Meanwhile, the United Nations is holding events to remember the survivors and honor the survivors around the country. Rwanda's President Paul Kagame is expected to lead the commemoration event in Kigali on Sunday.
Commemoration is one of the strategies for Never Again. In a Rwandan context, remembering is part of prevention of genocide. Citizens are very aware that forgetting what happened contributes to it repeating. So commemoration contributes to genocide prevention, and that's why we have it every year. It's not really recommended to forget what happened. As a country, to prevent it from happening again, it has to be remembered again and again. That's the critical part of commemoration. The other thing is that through commemoration, people get to even share testimonies of what happened, who did what, where, how it happened, and that one makes people really commit, so that they commit never to do what happened at whatever level, whether they are bystanders, survivors, perpetrators, get reminded every year that this thing should never ever happen.
From East Africa, we head to the north, where thousands of persons protest in Morocco's commercial capital, Casablanca, against massacres in the Gaza Strip and against the country's normalization of ties with Israel. The protest, late last night and early this morning, the largest scale rally of its kind in Morocco, was called by the banned but tolerated Islamist group Al-Wal Asani. The group also organized similar gatherings in the capital Rabat and the port of Tangier.
تأتي هذه المسيرة الشعبية الحاشدة بمدينة البيضاء للتعبير عن تضامن مع الشعب الفلسطيني واستمرار فعاليات التضامن مع قضية عادلة، هي قضية الشعب الفلسطيني الذي تعرض لحرب قذرة وشرسة وظالمة وغير عادلة. نعبر من خلال هذه المسيرة عن شجبنا للصمت الدولي المطبق وعن العز الأممي لوقف هذه الحرب الظالمة ولملاحقة الكيان الصهيوني ورموزه.
كذلك الرسائل التي ترسلها هذه الوقفات وهذه المسيرات هي التنديد بالتطبيع، على اعتبار أن التطبيع الأنظمة العربية مع الكيان الصهيوني هو يعطي ضوء أخضر لهذا الكيان لكي يسير ويزيد في تقتيله وفي سفكه للدماء وفي عدوانه ضد المدنيين. وبأن التطبيع هو سلوك وقرار للحاكمين يخالف قرار الشعب. فطيلة هذه الشهور يعني كانت هناك مسيرات مليونية في الرباط وفي الدار البيضاء وفي كل المغرب، كلها تندد بالتطبيع وكلها تعارض التطبيع، وهي كلها بمثابة استفتاء شعبي. يفترض من الحاكمين أن يستمعوا لإرادة الشعب من أجل تحقيق.
Still ahead on the news, Kazakhstan's government says deadly floods biggest disaster in over 80 years. We have details of this and more after the break. Outside of the African continent, the U.S. Treasury Department in a statement says that the United States and China have agreed to hold intensive exchanges on balanced growth. This comes after 2 days of talks between Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and her Chinese counterpart, He Lifeng, in Guangzhou. Now, addressing journalists, U.S. Treasury Secretary disclosed that they have been clear with China that they see Russia as gaining support from goods that Chinese firms are supplying to Russia. The planned talks mark the latest step forward in joint efforts to stabilize rocky ties between the world's two leading economies since a meeting between President Joe Biden and Xi Jinping last November.
Well, we've spent a great deal of time on the issue of balancing between domestic demand and promoting supply and overcapacity during our 2 days of talks. We spent more than 2 hours on this issue this morning, and I think the Chinese realize how concerned we are about the implications of their industrial strategy for the United States, for the potential to flood our markets with exports that make it difficult for American firms to compete, and that other
Kazakhstan's president says that the floods in the border region with Russia may be the biggest natural disaster in over 80 years. Tokayev added that a state of emergency was declared in 10 regions and that the situation is difficult, but there is no need for despair. Earlier, Russia said it had evacuated 4,000 persons in the Orenburg region, the southern Urals, near Kazakhstan, due to flooding after a dam burst.
Обращаюсь к вам в связи с тяжелой ситуацией с весенними паводками после обильного снеготаяния. Произошла природная катастрофа, равной которой не было многие годы. Возможно, это самое крупное бедствие по своим масштабам и последствиям за последние 80 с лишним лет. Из-за паводков режим чрезвычайной ситуации местного масштаба объявлен в 10 регионах страны. На борьбу со стихией мобилизованы все ресурсы Министерства чрезвычайных ситуаций, а также силы Министерства внутренних дел, Национальной гвардии, Вооруженных сил и Комитета национальной безопасности. Акиматы пострадавших регионов работают в круглосуточном режиме. Большую помощь на местах им оказывают несколько десятков тысяч волонтеров. Ситуация тяжелая, но отчаиваться не следует. Правопорядок. По моему приказу Министерство обороны направит дополнительные воинские соединения на борьбу со стихией. Даю поручение правительству разбронировать государственный материальный резерв, помочь жителям.
Let's wrap it up with some sporting details. We are defending champions. Rivers Hoppers fell to a 64-52 defeat against Ghana's Spintex Knights in the second semi-final game at the ongoing Louis Adam Invitational Basketball Championship on Friday. In a game that was a rematch of last year's final, Ghana's Spintex Knights had a near-perfect display that saw them avenge their loss to the Kingsmen in the final match of the last edition. The group edged Rivers Hoppers 17-16 in the fourth quarter and will now face Hops and Reed in the final match by 4 p.m. on Saturday, while Rivers Hoppers will play against Lagos Raptors in the third-place game at 10 a.m. And that's a wrap on the news at this time. But before we go, another look at some of our top stories. We told you that Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu appoints new management team for NELFund. We also told you that Nigeria to introduce new national identity card scheme with enhanced features. And finally, we also told you that France says it is ready to build balanced partnerships in Africa. Don't forget to send in your eyewitness report to the WhatsApp number on the screen. You can also follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can watch us live on DSTV channel 422 Star Times, channel 274 Avo TV, and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I'm Dapo Adegboye.